My parents told me I was lucky to be adopted, until I discovered they kept my twin brother and threw me away like garbage because I was born a girl. Hi, I'm Madison Clark, and this is the story of how my biological parents gave me up for adoption at 8 years old, simply because I wasn't the son they wanted. What they didn't know was that 20 years later, I'd inherit a fortune that would make them come crawling back, begging for forgiveness they'd never deserve. It was a cold Tuesday morning in October when my entire world shattered. I remember sitting on my small bed, clutching my favourite stuffed rabbit, watching my mother pack my clothes into a worn suitcase. The sound of the zipper closing felt like a door slamming shut on my childhood forever. "Mommy, where am I going?" I asked, my 8-year-old voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even look at me. "You're going to live with new people, Madison, people who can take better care of you." But I could see my twin brother David playing with his toys in the next room, completely unaware that his sister was about to disappear from his life forever. When I pointed to him and asked why he wasn't packing too, my mother's face turned cold. "David is staying with us. He's different." Different. That's what she called it. What she really meant was that he was a boy, and I was just a worthless girl. I still remember the ride to the children's home. My father drove in complete silence, while my mother stared out the window, acting like I didn't exist. When we pulled up to the grey building with its institutional windows and chain-link fence, I felt my stomach drop. "Please don't leave me here," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I promise I'll be good, I'll be better." My father finally spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Madison, this is what's best for everyone. You'll understand when you're older." What I understood, even at 8 years old, was that I was being thrown away like trash. As we walked through the doors of the children's home, I heard my mother talking to the social worker, Mrs. Peterson. She thought I couldn't hear them, but every word burned into my memory like a brand. "We just can't afford to raise 2 children, my mother lied smoothly. "And honestly, boys have better opportunities in life. Madison will be fine here. She's adaptable." Mrs. Peterson nodded sympathetically, writing notes on her clipboard. "I understand. It's a difficult decision for any family." But then I heard my father add something that would haunt me for years. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "we only wanted the boy anyway. Girls are expensive and useless. They just grow up to be someone else's problem." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on a plastic chair in the waiting area, my small hands gripping the rabbit so tightly I thought I might break it. That's when I realized the horrible truth. They weren't giving me away because they were poor or desperate. They were giving me away because I was born the wrong gender. Mrs. Peterson led me to a small room with bunk beds and told me it would be my new home. Through the window, I watched my parents walk back to their car. My mother never looked back, but my father paused for just a moment. For a split second, I thought he might change his mind, might realize what a terrible mistake they were making. Instead, he got in the car and drove away, leaving me standing at that window with tears streaming down my face, watching the only family I'd ever known disappear down the street. The other children at the home were kind, but I felt hollow inside. Every night, I'd lie in my narrow bed and wonder what David was doing. Was he missing me? Did he even know where I'd gone? Or had my parents told him some lie about why his twin sister had simply vanished from his life? The worst part was the silence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but no one came to visit me. No phone calls. No letters. No birthday cards. It was like Madison Clark had never existed in their world. I spent 2 years in that children's home, watching other kids get adopted, while I remained forgotten. I started to believe what my parents had said, that I was worthless, that being a girl made me less valuable, that I deserved to be abandoned. But then everything changed when Robert Harrison walked into my life. Mr. Harrison was different from the other adults who came looking for children to adopt. He was a successful businessman in his 50s, well-dressed but not intimidating, with kind eyes that actually saw me when he looked at me, while other potential parents always seemed to gravitate toward the younger children or the boys. Mr. Harrison sat down next to me in the common room and simply started talking. "What are you reading?" he asked, noticing the book in my hands. "It's about a girl who becomes a lawyer," I said quietly. "She helps people who can't help themselves." He smiled. "That sounds like a noble profession. Do you want to be a lawyer when you grow up?" I looked up at him, surprised that an adult was actually interested in my dreams. "My parents said girls can't do important jobs. They said I'd just be someone else's problem." Mr. Harrison's expression darkened for a moment, and I saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, but not at me. "Well, Madison," he said, "I think your parents were very wrong about a lot of things." That conversation lasted for hours. He told me about his successful business, about how he'd always wanted children but had never married. He talked about his belief that every child deserved love and opportunity regardless of gender. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like someone actually valued me as a person. 3 months later, the adoption was finalised. I'll never forget the day Mr. Harrison, who told me I could call him Dad if I wanted to, picked me up from the children's home. I had the same worn suitcase my mother had packed 2 years earlier, but this time I wasn't being thrown away. I was being chosen. The house he brought me to was like something from a fairy tale. It had tall windows, a library full of books, and most importantly, it had a room that was mine. Not shared with other kids, not temporary, mine. He'd had it painted my favourite colour, purple, and there was a desk where I could do homework and dream about my future. "This is your home now, Madison," he said as we stood in the doorway, "for as long as you want it to be." That night, as I lay in my new bed in my new room, I cried for the last time about being abandoned. These weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and hope. Dad kept every promise he made to me. He supported my education, encouraged my dreams, and never once made me feel like I was less valuable because I was a girl. When I expressed interest in law school, he helped me research the best programs. When I struggled with difficult classes, he hired tutors. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of my worth. Under his care, I flourished. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to college, and went on to law school at Stanford. By the time I was 28, I was a successful attorney with my own practice, specializing in family law and children's rights. Throughout those 20 years, I never forgot about my biological family. Sometimes I'd wonder about David, whether he was happy, whether he ever thought about his twin sister who had mysteriously disappeared from his life. I wondered if my parents had ever regretted their decision, if they'd ever realised what they'd lost when they threw me away. A few times over the years, I'd been tempted to reach out. When I graduated from law school, when I won my first major case, when I bought my own house, during these milestone moments, some part of me wanted to share my success with the people who had given me life, even though they'd chosen not to give me love. But every time I considered making contact, I remembered my father's words. Girls are expensive and useless. I remembered how easily they'd walked away from me, how completely they'd erased me from their lives. What would be the point of reaching out to people who had made it clear I meant nothing to them? So I built my life without them. I had Dad, who loved me unconditionally. I had friends, colleagues, a career I was passionate about. I had created a family of choice, people who valued me for who I was rather than dismissing me for what I wasn't. But life has a way of bringing the past back when you least expect it. On a quiet Thursday evening in March, I was working late in my office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. Madison Clark? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Yes, this is Madison Clark. Ms. Clark? This is Dr. Matthews from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about Robert Harrison. I'm sorry to inform you that he was brought in earlier this evening after suffering a massive heart attack. The world stopped. My pen fell from my hand, and I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. He's stable for now, but Ms. Clark, you need to come quickly. He's been asking for you. I drove to the hospital in a blur, my heart pounding with fear and panic. Dad was the only real family I had. He was my anchor, my supporter, the man who had saved me from a life of feeling worthless and unwanted. The thought of losing him was unbearable. When I reached his room, he looked so small and fragile, connected to all those machines. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and he managed a weak smile. "There's my brilliant daughter," he whispered. I took his hand and held it tight. "Dad, you're going to be okay. The doctors said—" "Madison," he interrupted gently, "we both know this is it. I can feel it." I wanted to argue, to deny what was happening, but I could see the truth in his eyes. This strong, vibrant man who had given me everything was saying goodbye. "I need you to know something," he continued, his voice growing weaker. "These 20 years with you have been the greatest joy of my life. You were never just my adopted daughter. You were the child I chose, the daughter I dreamed of having." Tears streamed down my face as I squeezed his hand. "Dad, you saved my life. You showed me what real love looks like." He smiled again, that warm, proud smile I'd grown up seeing whenever I accomplished something. "You saved mine too, sweetheart. You gave an old bachelor a reason to live, a legacy to be proud of." We talked through the night, sharing memories and expressing gratitude for the time we'd had together. As dawn broke through the hospital windows, Dad's breathing became more laboured. "Promise me something, Madison," he said with his final burst of strength. "Anything, Dad. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel worthless again. You are extraordinary, and don't you ever forget it." Those were his last words to me. Robert Harrison, the man who had chosen me when my own parents threw me away, passed away holding my hand as the sun rose on what would become the first day of my life without him. The funeral was beautiful, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Dad had touched through his business and philanthropy. As I stood at the podium delivering his eulogy, I looked out at the sea of faces and realized something profound. This man, who had never had biological children, had created a family anyway. Every person in that room had been impacted by his kindness, his generosity, his belief in the worth of every human being. But the biggest shock came a week later when his attorney Michael Chen called me to his office for the reading of the will. "Madison," Michael said, adjusting his glasses as he opened the thick legal document, "I think you should sit down for this." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, expecting to hear about some sentimental items Dad had left me. Maybe his watch or his collection of first edition books. What I heard instead changed everything. Robert Harrison leaves his entire estate, including all business, holdings, real estate, and liquid assets, to his beloved daughter, Madison Clark, Michael read. The total value of the estate is approximately $50 million. I stared at him in shock. 50 million? That can't be right. Michael smiled. "It's right, Madison. Your father was a very wealthy man and he left every penny to you. There's also a personal letter." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope he handed me. Dad's familiar handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you, but my love for you continues forever. This money isn't just an inheritance, it's proof of how much I believed in you and your potential to change the world. You were thrown away by people who couldn't see your value, but I saw it from the moment I met you. Use this gift to help other children who feel as lost and worthless as you once did. Make sure no other little girl ever believes she's less valuable than her brother. I love you always, Dad." I sat in Michael's office and cried. Tears of grief for losing the most important person in my life, but also tears of overwhelming gratitude for having been loved so completely by someone who didn't have to choose me but did anyway. What I didn't know was that news of my inheritance would spread quickly through our small city's business community. What I couldn't have predicted was that this money, this proof of Dad's love and faith in me, would bring my biological family crawling out of the woodwork after 20 years of silence. The first sign that my past was about to collide with my present came just 3 days after the will reading. I was sitting in my office late Friday afternoon, still processing the enormity of Dad's gift and trying to figure out how to honour his wishes, when my secretary buzzed me through the intercom. "Ms. Clark, there's a reporter from the City Tribune on line 2. She says she wants to discuss your recent inheritance." My stomach dropped. I'd hoped to keep the inheritance private, at least until I figured out what to do with it. "Tell her I'm not available for comment." But it was too late. The story had already been written. The next morning, my face stared back at me from the front page of the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local attorney inherits $50 million fortune from adoptive father." The article detailed Dad's successful business empire and painted me as the lucky adopted daughter who had struck gold with a generous benefactor. What bothered me most wasn't the invasion of privacy. It was how they portrayed my relationship with Dad. as if I'd somehow manipulated a lonely old man for his money rather than being genuinely loved by him. The article made it sound like a business transaction rather than a father's love for his chosen daughter. I was still fuming about the newspaper story when my phone rang at 8:30 that same morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it felt familiar. Madison Clark speaking. There was a pause, then a man's voice, older now, weathered by 20 years, but unmistakably familiar. Madison, sweetheart, is that really you? My blood turned to ice. After 20 years of complete silence, my biological father was calling me. And he was using pet names like we'd spoken yesterday. Who is this? I asked, though I already knew. It's Dad, honey, your father. I know it's been too long, but I saw the article in the paper about your inheritance, and I just had to call. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. This man who had literally thrown me away because I was born female was now calling himself my dad and claiming to be proud of me. The man who had told a social worker that girls were expensive and useless was suddenly using terms of endearment. You're not my dad, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. My dad died last week. You're just the man who gave me away. Madison, please don't be like that. I know we made mistakes. Mistakes? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. You didn't make mistakes. You made a deliberate choice to keep your son and throw away your daughter because you thought I was worthless. That's not how it was, honey. We were young. We were struggling financially. Stop lying. My voice was sharp now. I heard you tell the social worker that you only wanted the boy anyway and that girls were expensive and useless. I was 8 years old and I heard every word. There was silence on the other end of the line. He hadn't expected me to remember, or maybe he'd convinced himself over the years that it hadn't happened that way. Madison, he finally said, his tone shifting to something that sounded rehearsed. We've missed you every day for 20 years. Your mother cries about you. David asks about his sister all the time. We want to make things right. We want you to come home. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. If you've missed me so much, where have you been for the past 20 years? When I graduated high school as valedictorian? When I got into Stanford? When I passed the bar exam? You had 20 years to reach out, and you chose silence. The only thing that changed is that now I have money. That's not true. It is true. I stood up from my desk, pacing to the window. You saw that newspaper article, and suddenly you remembered you had a daughter. Well, congratulations, your timing is perfect. I finally have something you want. Before he could respond, I hung up, but the call had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. For 20 years, I'd wondered what it would be like to hear from them again. I'd imagined scenarios where they apologized, where they explained that giving me away had been the hardest decision of their lives, where they expressed genuine remorse for the pain they'd caused. This wasn't that. This was a calculated attempt to get their hands on money they hadn't earned from a daughter they discarded like garbage. The calls didn't stop there. Over the next few days, my biological mother called 3 times, leaving tearful voicemails about how much she'd always loved me and how the family wasn't complete without me. Each message was more desperate than the last, talking about family bonds and blood being thicker than water. Then David called. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unknown number, but something made me pick up. Maybe it was curiosity about my twin brother, the boy I'd shared a womb with, but hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Madison, it's David, your brother. His voice was different than I'd expected, deeper obviously, but also tired in a way that spoke of hard living. There was none of the warmth or genuine emotion I'd hoped to hear. "Hello, David. Look, I'm going to cut right to the chase here," he said, and I could hear the desperation underneath his attempt at casualness. "I know Mum and Dad have been calling you, and I know you're pissed about the adoption thing, but that was 20 years ago. We're family, Madison, blood family, and family helps family when times get tough." "Times are tough for you?" I asked. "I'm in a bit of a financial bind," he admitted. "My business went under last year, and I've got some debts that need paying. Nothing too serious, but you know how it is." "Actually, I don't know how it is. Why don't you explain it to me?" There was a pause, then David's voice became more urgent. "I owe some people money, okay? Important people. The kind of people who don't like to wait for their payments. I need about $200,000 to make this go away." $200,000. My twin brother, who I hadn't heard from in 20 years, was calling to ask for money to pay off what sounded like gambling debts or worse. And you thought you'd call your long-lost sister to bail you out. Come on, Madison, you just inherited $50 million. 200 grand is pocket change to you now. And we're twins. We shared the womb together. That has to count for something. The manipulation was cruder than our father's, but no less transparent. "David, do you even remember me? Do you remember anything about us as children?" "Of course I do. We were best friends. We did everything together." What was my favourite stuffed animal? Silence. What was my favourite colour? What was I afraid of? What did I want to be when I grew up? Do you remember anything about your twin sister, or am I just a convenient ATM to you? Look, I don't have time for memory games. I need this money, and you have it. It's that simple. Here's what's simple, David. You had 20 years to be my brother. 20 years to reach out, to include me in your life, to treat me like family, but you never did. Mum and Dad never did. So don't call me now pretending we have some sacred twin bond when all you really want is cash. Fine. His voice turned cold and aggressive. Be selfish. But don't forget, when those people you call family die or leave you, we'll still be your blood. You'll still be stuck with us, whether you like it or not. The threat was subtle but clear. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my office, staring at my phone, feeling a mixture of sadness and disgust. This was my biological family, people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money, who felt entitled to my inheritance simply because we shared DNA. But the worst was yet to come. 2 days later, as I was leaving my office building after a long day in court, I found them waiting for me in the parking lot. All three of them, my biological parents and David, standing next to a beat-up sedan that had seen better days. My mother looked older than her years, her hair showing grey roots and her face lined with what I assumed was stress. My father had gained weight and lost hair, but his eyes held the same coldness I remembered from childhood. David looked like a harder version of how I'd imagined he'd grow up. Same facial structure as mine, but with a meanness around the eyes that spoke of bad choices and worse consequences. "Madison, sweetheart," my mother rushed toward me with outstretched arms, as if we were having a joyful reunion instead of an ambush. "Look at you. You're so beautiful, so successful." I stepped back, avoiding her attempted embrace. "What are you doing here?" "We came to see you," my father said, approaching more cautiously. "When you wouldn't take our calls, we decided to come in person. We've driven 6 hours to get here. I didn't take your calls because I have nothing to say to you." "Madison, please." My mother's voice took on a pleading tone. "We know we made mistakes when you were little, but we were so young, so overwhelmed. We did what we thought was best for you." "Best for me?" I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Giving me away because I was born female was what was best for me." David stepped forward, and I could see the desperation in his face more clearly now. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes looked expensive but worn, like someone trying to maintain an image he could no longer afford. "Look, Madison, we can stand here and relitigate the past all day, but it won't change anything. What matters is that we're here now, and we want to make things right." "How exactly do you plan to make 20 years of abandonment right?" "By being a family again," my mother said tearfully, "by including you in our lives, by making up for lost time." "And how much would this family reunion cost me?" I asked bluntly. The three of them exchanged glances, and I saw my father's jaw tighten. They hadn't expected me to be so direct. "Madison, it's not about money," my mother began. "It's entirely about money," I interrupted. "You ignored my existence for 20 years, and the only thing that changed is that I inherited a fortune. If you'd read that newspaper article and it said I'd inherited $1,000, would you be standing here right now?" "That's not fair," David said angrily. "We're your family. Blood family. That has to mean something." "Family means something," I agreed. "But you're not my family. My family was Robert Harrison, the man who chose to love me when you chose to throw me away. My family consists of people who've been there for me through good times and bad, not people who show up only when they need something." My father's facade finally cracked. "You listen here, young lady. We are your parents, whether you like it or not. We brought you into this world, and that gives us certain rights." "Rights?" I laughed, but there was no humour in it. "You forfeited any parental rights when you signed the adoption papers. Legally and morally, you have no claim to me or my life." "We just need a little help," my mother said desperately. "David owes some money to some very dangerous people. If something happens to him, then maybe David should have thought about that before he made whatever bad decisions led him here," I said coldly. "His poor choices are not my responsibility." "Please," David stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath, despite it being the middle of the afternoon. "I'm your twin brother. We came from the same place. You can't just turn your back on me." "I'm not turning my back on you, David. You never gave me a chance to have your back in the first place. For 20 years, you've lived your life without Madison Clark in it. Continue doing that." I turned to walk toward my car, but my father grabbed my arm. "You're being incredibly selfish," he hissed. "You have more money than you could spend in a lifetime, and you won't spare a few $100,000 to help your own brother?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me. Now." Something in my voice made him release me immediately. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "You're going to get in your car and drive back to wherever you came from. You're going to stop calling me, stop trying to contact me, and stop showing up at my workplace. I have security cameras in this parking lot, and if I see any of you here again, I'll file for restraining orders." "Madison, please." My mother started crying now. "We're desperate. We don't know where else to turn. You should have thought about that 20 years ago when you decided I was worthless," I said. "You made your choice then. This is mine now." I got in my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot. In my rear-view mirror, I could see them arguing among themselves, probably about whose approach had failed and what to try next. But I knew they wouldn't give up easily. People who were desperate enough to track down a daughter they'd abandoned after seeing her name in the newspaper weren't going to be deterred by one conversation. I was right. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. They hired a lawyer to contest Dad's will, claiming that as my biological parents, they had a right to part of the inheritance. The case was thrown out immediately. They had no legal standing whatsoever, but the attempt revealed how far they were willing to go. They started showing up at my favourite restaurant, my gym, my grocery store, never threatening, always just happening to be there when I arrived, always wanting just 5 minutes to talk. It was a form of psychological terrorism designed to wear me down. The final straw came when I arrived at my office one Monday morning to find my mother sitting in the waiting area, crying dramatically for the benefit of my staff. "Madison," she wailed when she saw me, "please just listen to me for 5 minutes. David is in real trouble. These people are going to hurt him if we don't pay them by Friday." Every person in my office was staring. My secretary looked mortified, my junior associates looked uncomfortable, and my clients were getting a front row seat to family drama I'd spent 20 years trying to leave behind. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, using her married name deliberately, "you need to leave. Now." "I'm not leaving until you agree to help your brother." "Security," I called to the front desk. "Please escort this woman from the building." As security led her away, she turned back to shout, "You used to be such a sweet little girl. What happened to you? Money has made you cold and heartless." That evening, I called Michael Chen and asked him to come to my office. "I need to establish a foundation," I told him. "Something that will help children who've been abandoned or given up by their biological families. I want it set up so that my biological family can never touch a penny of Dad's money, no matter what legal tricks they try." Michael nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what Robert would have wanted. He always said you had the biggest heart of anyone he knew. He also said, I should never let anyone make me feel worthless again," I said. "Well, I refuse to let the people who threw me away profit from the love of the man who chose me." The foundation was established within 2 weeks. The Harrison Foundation for Abandoned Children would provide resources, counselling, and financial support for kids who'd been given up or thrown away by their biological families. It would fund adoption services, educational scholarships, and therapeutic programs. Most importantly, It would be a permanent monument to the kind of love that chooses rather than abandons, the kind of family that builds up rather than tears down. When news of the foundation hit the papers, my biological family made one last desperate attempt to reach me. David called from what sounded like a payphone, drunk and desperate. "You bitch," he slurred into the phone. "You're giving away millions to strangers when your own brother is about to get his legs broken. What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who knows the difference between charity and extortion," I replied calmly. "The kind of person who chooses to help children, who remind me of myself at 8 years old rather than funding the gambling debts of a man who's never been my brother in any way that matters. Those people aren't your real family." "You're absolutely right, David. Robert Harrison wasn't my real father. And the kids I'm helping through the foundation aren't my real siblings, but they're my chosen family, and that's worth more than any biological connection." "You'll regret this," he said, his voice turning nasty. "Someday you'll need family, and we won't be there." "David," I said gently, "you've never been there. That's the point." I hung up and changed my phone number the next day. 3 months later, I was standing in the children's home where I'd spent 2 years of my childhood, presenting them with a check that would fund their operations for the next 5 years. The same Mrs. Peterson who had processed my adoption was still working there, now as the director. "Madison," she said with tears in her eyes, "this is incredible. Do you know how many children this will help?" I looked around at the kids in the common room, some reading, some playing, all of them waiting for someone to choose them the way Dad had chosen me. "I know exactly how many it will help," I said. "All of them, every single child who's ever been told they're worthless. Every kid who's been thrown away for being the wrong gender or the wrong burden or the wrong anything. They're going to know that they matter." As I watched a little girl with pigtails reading the same book about the lawyer that I'd been reading when Dad found me, I thought about the question he'd asked me that day. "Do you want to be a lawyer when you grow up?" I'd become a lawyer just like I'd dreamed. But more than that, I'd become the kind of person who used her success to protect others, who turned pain into purpose, who chose love over bitterness. My biological parents had thrown me away because they thought boys were more valuable than girls. But the man who chose me had seen something they'd missed, that value isn't determined by gender or blood or biology. It's determined by character, by kindness, by the choice to build others up rather than tear them down. Standing in that children's home, surrounded by kids who reminded me of my 8-year-old self, I finally understood what Dad had meant when he told me I'd saved his life too. By choosing to love me, he'd become the father he was meant to be. By giving me a chance, he'd created a legacy that would outlive both of us. And by refusing to let my biological family's greed and manipulation poison the gift he'd given me, I was honouring everything he'd taught me about what family really means. Some families are born, others are chosen. The chosen ones, I'd learned, are often the ones that last.